welcome back to my channel. If New Year, hello, hi, my name is Jyotsna and welcome to this video where I talk about the 21 books I read so far in 2024. I am not going to be doing this in any fancy way. Honestly, it's going to be very straightforward. The timestamps are in the description box. The books are in January, the books are in February, and the books are in March. All of them are going to be spoken about in no particular order, but mainly in the order of me completing the book. So let's get started for January. So the first book that I finished in 2024 was Sons of Darkness by Gaurav Mohanty. And I really enjoyed this book a lot. This is the author's debut novel, and it is something of a book that needs to be looked forward to in the Indian fantasy spectrum. This book is a mixture of Game of Thrones set with the characters of Mahabharata, and it kind of weaves this political tale of a lot of things coming together, including magic, politics, famous characters that we've learned in the Hindu epics, and also it takes a page from a lot of high fantasy books in general and gives its own twist and its own version. I really enjoyed this book thoroughly. I do recommend it, especially if you're Indian and you're looking to read fantasy, and if you've never read Indian fantasy, this is the book that you should start with, because this I felt was the magnum opus of Indian fantasy scene. The next book that I finished was The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. Now, of course, a lot of people have read this by now, but for me, this was a very warm cup of tea on a very rainy day, honestly. And this book is pretty much cute slash cozy slash Downton Abbey-ish. And I'm telling you that if you are looking forward to read this book and you have not read it yet, then this is one of the best books out there that will help you get out of a reading slump. First thing. Second thing, it is a warm hug, like I said, on a bad day. And third thing, you will really fall in love with the characters in the book, and especially the main character, who's our butler, Mr. Stevens. I do recommend it if you've not read it yet. The next book that I finished was Miss Kim Knows and Other Stories by Cho Nam-joo. Now, I am a huge fan of Cho Nam-joo because I really loved Kim Ji-young, born 1984. This does not live up to the expectations of her previous work, but this book is good in general. I would say that I gave it an average 3.5 stars. Honestly, it was not a full 4 for me, and it basically kind of talks about various women in this South Korean society. It's a set of short stories about them and how they basically go ahead and enact in different situations. Like, it's again about women by a woman, and again, I didn't like it much, but maybe you will. But yeah, if you like Kim Ji-young 1984 and you're expecting this to be something similar, that's not the case. And then the next book I finished was Prophet Song by Paul Lynch, and oh my god, this is such terrific book. It really gets to you. So the setting is very simple. It is a dystopian novel set in Ireland, where there is an autocratic rule that has come in, and they are trying to restrict a lot of things. What this has started is a civil war between the rebels and the government, and all of it just falls into this whole idea of chaos. It's really chaotic, but it really hits you hard. Honestly, if books like these win the Booker Prize, I will get back to reading the Booker books, because if you've been following me, you know that Booker and I do not have a good streak. I do not like the books that generally win the Booker, but this book has changed my mind, and maybe, just maybe, I'll follow, or maybe I will not. But if you've not read this yet and you're looking for a dystopian read set in the current society, then please go ahead and read this ASAP. And that gets me to my next book, which is one of my favorite non-fiction reads of this year, and that is We Could Have Been Friends, My Father and I by Raja Shehadin. And oh my god, this is such a powerful book which talks about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We look at the conflict from very narrow eyes today, but this talks about the author's experiences and his father's experiences about fighting for the justice of the Palestinians. Now, if you are not following up with history here and you're just looking at this season of the conflict, then this is the wrong time to look at it. Honestly, you have to go back 50, 80 years in the past in order to see what kind of injustices have happened to the Palestinians and how they are left with no homeland. This book also kind of talks about the interference of Jordan in Palestinian matters, and honestly, that was a bit surprising to me because for someone who does not know the history or is not well read on the Palestinian Israeli history or the history of the region of the East Bank and the West Bank, this was an eye opener for me. And this book really, really helps you understand the conflict. Now, I won't say that this is the sole book that you should read to understand the whole situation. There are many books out there. My experience says that you should read minimum 5 books to have a perspective on what things are in a 360-degree spectrum. But that being said, this is a very good book to start with. I read it on audio. I think you should do it too. The second to last book I read in January was The Days at the Morisaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagisawa. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing the name wrong, but honestly, I did not like this book, to be frank. Okay, if you are someone who likes cozy books and that's why you're picking it up, and I picked it up for the same reason. The thing is that the first half is really good. It's about the bookshop. It's about how our main character goes to her uncle's bookshop and starts working there and things like that, because she is trying to overcome a breakup. But then the second half just takes a fall. I would say read it at your own risk. I did not like this book. I think I just gave it 3 stars and it was totally a neutral book for me. But if you like those cozy books set in bookshops with bad endings, then maybe you'll like this book. And then the last book I read in January 2024 was The Room on the Roof by Ruskin Bond. Now, I had this book on my Kindle for a very long time, I think maybe 4 or 5 years now, but I never got around to reading it. But honestly, I realized that I'm a bit old for Ruskin Bond now. Like, although I did enjoy his works when I was a teenager, especially his short stories that would come in various children's magazines like Chanda Mama, I really did not like this book at all. It's his debut novel and I understand it, but I just felt like it was a bit inappropriate. I mean, how are kids reading it? I know many people will have different thoughts because they were reading this in their formative years. But if you're not in your formative years, honestly, Ruskin Bond is not for like 30-year-olds like me. Honestly, Ruskin Bond is for kids, and I'm not going to make that mistake again. And that being said, let's get to the books in February. So the first book that I finished in February was Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, and I absolutely love Roxane Gay for her social media presence and for all the things that she does, especially her Goodreads reviews, and also I've loved her book Hunger. But Bad Feminist is one of her earlier books, which would be essays on pop culture and how pop culture has affected her and her community, that is the Asian American community, or also this extends to the African American community. Now, a lot of these essays were not relatable to me because I do not come from the US or I am not grown up in the US. She talks about some TV shows that I've never heard of. She talks about Scrabble too, but I am not like an expert in Scrabble. Maybe I've played Scrabble like twice or thrice in my life. But I do like how she nitpicks on certain famous Hollywood movies, like she nitpicks on The Help. She also nitpicks on 12 Years a Slave, and specifically the movie, the 12 Years a Slave and her problems with it. I won't say that this is a book for everyone, especially if you're an Indian like me and you don't relate to the culture in the US, then maybe you should not read it. You should just skip it. There are other better books that I feel that are much more relatable to the women across the world of the author. But that being said, read the author, but not this book. Probably it's okay if you don't read this book. The next book that I finished in February was My Father's Garden by Hansda Suvindha Shekhar, and I have read Hansda Suvindha Shekhar before. I've read The Adivasi Will Not Dance, and I really, really liked it a lot. And I had good high expectations from this book. I do think that this book is really, really good. It talks about our main character who's a doctor and a gay man who is still in the closet in a very conservative community. And it is very difficult for him to come out to his parents, and it is a story about how he is trying to come out to his father, especially because he's had a strained relationship with his father, and that's how the story flows. It is a very, very interesting book. It's a short novella too. if you are looking to read something from the Indian LGBTQIA plus spectrum, then this is the book I would recommend. And I would also recommend the author's other book, that is The Adivasi Will Not Dance. Then the next book I finished in this month of February was Lords of the Deccan by Anirudh Kanishetty, which won the Yuva Sahitya Puraskar for the last year. Now, I am actually grateful to not be acquainted, I would say, but to be at least close to the author through a book club that I'm a part of. And I'm telling you, this book is a must read if you are a fan of Indian history. Now, this book basically kind of encompasses the history of the Deccan from the Chalukyas to the Cholas. We learn a lot about, or we hear a lot about the Chalukyas, we hear a lot about the Cholas, but never has a book been written specifically for the mass or for the Indian audience, which would be taken as unbiased history in general. So I feel like this book really deserves a lot of credit for all the research that has gone into it. There are a lot of instances where the author tries to place some assumptions in the middle, and this is because of the lack of information, but that would really not, bum you out, to be honest. That would make the narrative an interesting experience, and this is a page turner of a book. If you are a real fan of Indian history, if you are someone who does not succumb to what the right wing calls Indian history, then I think this is a very, very good book for you. And one of the biggest reasons to read this book is because, this is what the author says in his introduction too, that 1,000 years from now, if the future Indians or people in the future need to learn about India and what India was, then they would specifically talk about all the cities of India like Delhi, Mumbai, Calcutta, Chennai, Bangalore and things like that, right? And you don't want that. You want them to know about the history of the rural India as well. And that is exactly what this book is about. It talks about a less known dynasty in the history of India, and especially in the history of South India. And yeah, all you history fans should read this ASAP. The next book that I read was for the BookTube Prize, and that is The 272 by Rachel Swarns. And this is a pretty good book for me. In the BookTube Prize rankings, it was 2nd out of 6, so it was dead in the top 3. And this book talks about how the Catholic Church in the US earned a lot of money through slavery. Although the Catholic Church and the Pope were against slavery, and they said that no, we don't enslave human beings and things like that, it talks about this group of priests who were responsible in creating Georgetown University on the outskirts of Washington DC to be slave owners. Okay, now this book actually is a sequel, or I would say a book that is totally based on one of the New York Times articles written by Rachel Swarns. And after the article blew up, a lot of things had happened in Washington DC and in Georgetown in that particular year, and then that transpired into a book which discusses about the descendants of these slaves who were sold by the Catholic Church, and it talks about their fate, and also it talks about the history on how the Catholic Church or the Jesuits came to be slave owners. If you're interested in the topic of slavery, I do recommend this a lot. My last book that I read in February 2024 was All Who You Sleep Tonight by Vikram Seth. Now, I have read Vikram Seth before. Of course, I love The Suitable Boy, but Vikram Seth is actually a poet rather than an author, and I am not a poetry person, so I've always steered clear from all of his poetry, or all poetry in general, irrespective of the author. So for me, this book came out as a surprise because apparently I do like Vikram Seth's poetry a lot, and I do recommend it if you are interested in poetry as well. I got this as a gift, and hence I ended up reading it. Otherwise, I would not have bought it. But yeah, poetry fans, please read Vikram Seth. You will thank me later. And then that finally gets me to the month of March, which is the last month. And these are the books that I read in March. The first book that I read in March was Greatest Folk Tales from Bihar by Nalin Verma. Now, Nalin Verma is a journalist and he tries to put together a bunch of Aesop's fables from Bihar that are taught to kids and teenagers, and it has some morals and things like that. Honestly, my thing is, don't read the book. It is kind of a very repetitive book. It's not a good book in my opinion, not because of the stories per se, but I just felt like the stories were a bit juvenile. Maybe children would love this book, but not adults. This book is not for adults. Don't read it. The next book I read was again for the BookTube Prize, and this book was Crossings by Ben Goldfarb. And this was fifth on my list of 6 books, so it was in the bottom 3, and that's why I don't recommend it. But this book did get shortlisted for the quarterfinals, so I'm sad about it. But the topic of the book is pretty interesting. It talks about how our highways and roads have disrupted the ecosystem surrounding them, and it's very interesting to see that the research gone into highways and roads, and having ecological roads so that animals can pass through and things like that are a recent phenomena, because it was too late by the time that people realized that roads are harming our nature. Yeah, surprising, I know. So this book kind of explains the need of roads for the need of ecological harmony as well, and it does that through certain experiments. Like there were certain experiments where there was a puma on either side of the road. They had not met each other yet, and all of that stuff. Honestly, if you are a nature fan, if you like reading books on nature, then this is something that you'll really, really appreciate. For me, I do not specifically like reading books on nature or trees. The overstory made me believe that I don't like books about nature, and I think that still continues for me unless someone writes a very good page turner for me, specifically when it comes to nature. And that gets me to my next book, which I again read for the BookTube Prize, and that's Fatherland by Burkhard Bilger. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He is an American journalist whose grandfather was a Nazi. Exactly. And it is a very, very interesting take, because it's a form of history and the memoir of his grandfather, of his grandmother, and his mother. His mother is the youngest of all the siblings, and he kind of talks about going back to Germany to research and staying there to understand his grandfather's lives through World War I and World War II. I'm telling you that this is a very, very interesting read. It's a shame that it did not go to the quarterfinals of the BookTube Prize, right? I think that this is one of the best books out there, which kind of talks about World War II from the other lens, from the Axis lens, because every time we get to hear stories from the Allied lens, and that kind of gets a bit repetitive after a point of time because the war has happened for a very long time. But it talks about the dichotomy of being a good human being and being a war criminal. Like, there is no distinction as for many people, but when both of it is in the same human being, how do you describe it? Like, humans are not black or white, humans are gray. And that is why I rated this book top 4.8 stars, and it was there in my top 3 books of the BookTube Prize list. Then in March again, I kind of borrowed a book from a friend, and this was The Enchanted Cottage by Ruskin Bond. And I like this book a lot because the illustrations in the book were pretty nice. It kind of fueled my art fire, literally. And if you get a chance to read a physical book of this, then please do read it. It's a very nice illustrated version. Again, I still feel like Ruskin Bond books are children's books, but yeah, this was like a good book for me because I didn't have to put much effort, because I was reading a lot of non-fiction, and this came to my rescue. So yeah, light read, it came to my rescue. I liked it. The next book that I finished was Vinnie and Nelson by Johnny Steinberg, and this was again a part of the BookTube Prize. I would not have read it otherwise, and I rated this 4.5 stars, and it was ranked 4th in my list of 6 books. Now, this book basically talks about Nelson Mandela and his second wife, Winnie Madikizela. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing her surname incorrectly. And it talks about the apartheid, the struggle that all of these freedom fighters or politicians, whatever you call them, as a part of the African National Congress, they had, the ANC and the entire political saga here. If you're looking to read more about the apartheid, and if you're looking to read more about South Africa's journey to becoming decolonized state, if I may say so, then this is the book that you should read. But the lens of the author here is specifically a bit tabloidy in nature. It's like reading a tabloid when you read the relationship of Winnie and Nelson, and it talks about how the couple was in front of the society and how they were in private. So yeah, minus all of the tabloid stuff, I think this is a good book to read. The only reason why this was 4 out of 6 books and not in the top 3 was because of the tabloidy nature of it. Then the next book that I read was Language by Xiaolu. I really do not know how to pronounce her name. She is a Chinese British author, and this was a vintage mini that I read while at Bookworm in Bangalore. Yeah, I know, I read it in one sitting and I really liked it a lot. I would like to read the bigger novel of from where this piece was taken. It talks about a Chinese immigrant who comes to the UK, and she's trying to find her way around all the places. She is trying to get acquainted with people, and in order to improve her English, she keeps going to the movies where she meets someone, and that's how the story progresses. Now this vintage mini was just 90 pages, so it was a very quick read, but I think that all vintage minis pack a very powerful excerpt for its size, and it kind of impacts you a lot, and it did impact me a lot because I really loved this book and gave it a 5 stars. And then I finished the book Invitation to a Banquet by Fuchsia Dunlop, which again I read for the Booktube Prize, and this was ranked 6 out of the 6 books. So this is my least liked book in the entire list of 6 for the octofinals, and unfortunately this book made it to the quarterfinals as well. So my luck this year with the Booktube Prize so far has not been good, but this basically kind of explores the history of Chinese cuisine. It talks about how the Chinese view their cuisine, because Indo-Chinese cuisine or American Chinese cuisine or British Chinese cuisine is very different from the Chinese cuisine that's consumed in China. And it basically talks about how the Chinese eat exotic animals and things like that, and there's a lot of criticism of the Chinese cuisine as well. There's a lot of appreciation of the Chinese cuisine as well, and if I would get $1 every time I said Chinese cuisine and again, I would have been earning in thousands by now. But that being said, that's not the case. I didn't like this book. It was really meh for me. I really slogged through it because again, I did not want to know about eating bear claws, eating snails, and things that I would not eat in general, right? And it's a personal discomfort for me. But if you are interested in food in general and want to see how the world eats, then maybe this is a good book for you. And that gets me to the last book I read in the month of March, and that is The Lumumba Plot by Stuart A. Reid, which was my best book in the octofinals for the Booktube Prize. I am so happy that I read it. It is one of my best non-fiction political books that I have read in a long time, and it is a page turner. The Lumumba Plot is basically about the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, who was the first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And of course, all of this happens with the backdrop of Belgium, US, Soviet Union, Cold War, things like that. And the book is absolutely well written. If you are a fan of political nonfiction, or if you're looking to read a thriller that is nonfiction, this is the book I highly recommend. So yeah, that is it. Those are the 21 books that I read in the past 3 months, and I hope you stayed so far in this video. Give me a books emoji if you did. I would really appreciate it if you could post it down in the comments, and let me know if you've read any books out of this list. Let's have a discussion in the comment section. I will see you in my next video whenever that is. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.